The grand chamber of the Ragmail Empire's High Council buzzed with activity, its walls pulsing with a dim, greenish glow. Hovering above the polished obsidian floor, holographic displays projected the image of a small, blue-green planet suspended in the void. It rotated lazily, unaware of the scrutiny it faced. To the Ragmail Empire, this planet was known as Object 512b, its inhabitants primitive, its defenses laughable. General Xylox leaned back in his chair, his six-fingered hand tapping rhythmically against the armrest. His reptilian eyes, yellow and calculating, focused on the projection. Despite the chatter of the council around him, Xylox remained silent, his mind turning over possibilities. Beside him, Admiral Valen gestured emphatically, his voice rising above the murmurs. "This is the perfect opportunity," Valen declared, his tone sharp and confident. His tall, sinewy frame was clad in the ceremonial armor of his station, gleaming with the luminescence of the chamber. Object 512b represents everything we seek. Resources in abundance, no planetary shields, no visible interstellar fleet. It's ripe for annexation. Xylox tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "And yet," he said, his voice low but firm, "this planet has remained unconquered for millennia, despite its supposed vulnerability. Does that not seem peculiar to you?" The chamber quieted momentarily. Valen snorted, dismissing the question with a wave of his hand. "My dear General, this is not a mystery. The primitives lack the technology to engage in interstellar diplomacy. Their obscurity has been their only protection." The hologram shifted, zooming in to reveal a bustling city. Machines crawled across its streets, and fragile-looking structures reached toward the sky. Xylox's gaze lingered on the image. He had studied countless worlds, and this Earth, did not strike him as ordinary. The Council's intelligence reports were thorough, documenting Earth's wars, its technological advancements, and its strange resilience in the face of internal strife. It was a planet of contradictions, chaotic yet enduring. Perhaps, Xylox began, leaning forward, but history suggests caution. Their records are filled with accounts of conflict, wars fought with devastating tenacity. This species has a peculiar knack for survival. Even when fractured, they endure. Valen smirked, his sharp teeth glinting in the chamber's light. "You overestimate them. They are primitives who rely on projectile weapons and combustible engines. Their military is fragmented across nations, barely capable of defending their own territories, let alone the planet." Xylox didn't reply immediately. Instead, he gestured to an aide, who adjusted the hologram to display a series of historical images. Battles waged in trenches, skies lit with fire, soldiers advancing against impossible odds. Among the images, a curious phrase appeared repeatedly: U.S. Army Rangers. Xylox's brow furrowed. "And what of this?" he asked, pointing to the phrase. "The intelligence reports mention these Rangers. Elite, it seems. Do we know their capabilities?" Valen laughed, a grating sound that echoed in the chamber. "A myth, General, a relic of a bygone era. These so-called Rangers are but a shadow of their predecessors. If they exist at all, their numbers are insignificant." Xylox wasn't so sure. Something about the records troubled him, though he couldn't articulate why. "Dispatch a scout," he ordered, ignoring Valen's exasperated sigh. "I want first-hand observations." The council murmured in agreement, though Valen's irritation was palpable. Still, he didn't object further. The scout ship, a sleek and silent vessel designed for stealth, departed within hours. It slipped past Earth's rudimentary defenses unnoticed, its instruments scanning and recording. The scout's transmission arrived 3 cycles later. It confirmed much of what the Council already believed. Earth's technological development was primitive by Ragmail standards. Their satellites were sparse, their space program laughably limited. And yet, there was something unusual in the data. A strange frequency detected near the planet's surface, one that the scout systems couldn't decode. Xylox examined the report with meticulous care. "This frequency," he said, addressing the council. "What do we make of it?" "A fluke," Valen said dismissively. "Background noise from their primitive communications. It holds no significance." Xylox wasn't convinced. His instincts, honed over decades of conquest, urged caution. But Valen's confidence was infectious, and the council was eager. The Ragmail Empire had grown fat on easy victories, and Earth seemed poised to be another. "We proceed," Valen declared, rising to his full height. "I will lead the fleet myself. We will subjugate this planet in a single cycle." Xylox hesitated, his gaze shifting to the hologram of Earth. He could feel the weight of the council's eyes on him, waiting for his response. Reluctantly, he nodded. "Very well, but I advise restraint. Do not underestimate them." Valen's grin widened. "Restraint is for the defeated, General. Watch and learn." The fleet assembled with swift precision. Dozens of warships, their hulls bristling with weapons, cast long shadows over Ragmail Prime as they ascended into the void. Valen stood on the bridge of his flagship, radiating confidence. Behind him, Xylox observed silently, his unease growing with each passing moment. As the fleet approached Earth, Valen ordered a display of power. Energy beams lanced through the planet's atmosphere, targeting uninhabited regions to demonstrate the futility of resistance. Yet, as the first ships descended, they encountered unexpected resistance. Earth's electromagnetic fields disrupted their systems, forcing adjustments. Valen brushed it off as a minor inconvenience. "Their planet is more chaotic than we anticipated," he remarked. "But it changes nothing." Xylox said nothing, his gaze fixed on the planet below. Chaos, indeed. But in chaos, he knew, there was often strength. The fleet continued its descent, oblivious to the eyes watching from the surface. The briefing room at Fort Bragg was dimly lit, the hum of projectors filling the tense silence. Captain Mike Tanner stood at the front, his arms crossed over his chest, staring at the grainy footage on the screen. The images, though blurry, were unmistakable. Alien warships descending through Earth's atmosphere, their sleek, predatory forms dwarfing anything humanity could muster. He let the weight of it settle before he spoke. "So, they finally decided to pay us a visit," Tanner said, his voice calm but edged with steel. His deep-set eyes scanned the room, meeting the gazes of his men one by one. "And they think we're just going to roll over." A ripple of low chuckles passed through the room, not of amusement but of grim resolve. The Rangers were a breed apart, forged in battles most men would never endure. Sergeant Jake Riley leaned back in his chair, his ever-present smirk firmly in place. "I don't know, Captain," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Those ships look pretty shiny. Maybe we should just surrender now and save everyone the trouble." Laughter followed, sharp and brief, before Tanner's steady voice cut through it. "Let's not underestimate them, Riley. That's how wars are lost. These aren't insurgents or rogue states. There's something we've never faced before, and they think they've already won." Tanner turned back to the screen as the footage shifted to diagrams of the alien vessels. The Pentagon's intelligence, cobbled together from intercepted transmissions and stolen schematics, was sparse but clear. The aliens had superior technology, vast numbers, and the confidence of a predator facing defenseless prey. Specialist Chris Miller, the team's tech expert, adjusted his glasses as he studied the data. "Their comm systems are sophisticated, but there's a flaw," he said, his voice quiet but insistent. "They rely on centralized hubs for coordination. If we can take out their relay stations, we can cripple their operations." Riley leaned forward, his smirk replaced by a wolfish grin. "You're saying we can blind them? Make those fancy ships stumble around like drunks?" "Something like that," Miller replied. "But it won't be easy. Their tech's way ahead of ours. We'll need to get close, real close." Tanner nodded, already forming a plan. "We've done more with less. Riley, you'll lead the sabotage teams. Miller, I want you on comms, working out how to jam their frequencies. Once we're in, the room was silent again, the weight of the mission settling over them. These men had faced impossible odds before, but this was different. They weren't just defending a base or liberating a city. They were defending the entire planet. Intel suggests they'll hit major population centers first. Tanner continued. Our job is to make sure they regret that decision. We'll use the terrain to our advantage. Hit and run, guerrilla tactics. They won't know what's coming. Riley chuckled, shaking his head. Man, I love it when a plan comes together. Despite the levity, Tanner could feel the tension in the room. These men were ready, but they weren't fools. They knew what they were up against. He decided it was time to remind them why they were here. You've all read the history books, Tanner said, his voice steady and deliberate. Every time someone's underestimated us, they've learned the hard way. From the revolution to Normandy to the hills of Afghanistan, it's the same story. People think we're easy to break. They're wrong. They always have been. The room stirred, a faint murmur of agreement passing through the ranks. Tanner allowed himself a small smile. They didn't need a rousing speech. They needed purpose, and they had it. As the briefing ended, the team moved to the armory, each man preparing in his own way. Riley was all bravado, cracking jokes as he checked his gear. You think aliens bleed red? Or is it something weird, like neon green? Miller rolled his eyes, busy configuring a portable jammer. Focus, Jake. I'd rather not find out what color they bleed because you got distracted. Tanner watched them, his face unreadable. He knew these men better than anyone. Riley's jokes masked his nerves, while Miller buried his in precision and control. Both were effective, and both would get the job done when it counted. The final preparations took hours. Tanner walked among his men, offering quiet words of encouragement and reminding them of their roles. Each step of the plan was meticulously rehearsed, every contingency accounted for. By the time night fell, the Rangers were ready. They moved out under the cover of darkness, their convoy silent as it weaved through empty streets. The government's evacuation orders had cleared the cities, leaving them eerily quiet. Tanner glanced out the window of the lead vehicle, his mind racing. He thought of the families hidden in underground shelters, of the millions who would never know the names of the men risking everything for them. It was a heavy burden, but one he bore willingly. Their first target was an alien relay station, a towering structure that had appeared overnight in the heart of the city. Its sleek, angular design glowed faintly, pulsing with energy. Tanner signaled the convoy to stop a safe distance away. Riley whistled softly, gazing at the structure through binoculars. Well, they sure know how to make an entrance. How do we take this thing down? Miller crouched beside him, already unpacking his equipment. EMP should do the trick, but we'll need to plant it at the base. Their defenses will pick up anything from range. Tanner nodded, his mind already calculating the risks. Riley, take point. Miller, stay close and cover him. The rest of us will provide support. As the team moved out, Tanner's radio crackled to life. It was a faint signal, distorted but unmistakable. Alien voices, their tones sharp and commanding, filled his earpiece. Miller had patched into their frequency. They're organizing, Miller whispered, his voice tense. They know we're here. Tanner's jaw tightened. Then we move faster. The Rangers advanced, their movements silent and precise. When they reached the base of the structure, Riley and Miller went to work, planning the EMP device while the others held the perimeter. The air was thick with tension, every shadow a potential threat. When the first alien patrol appeared, Tanner's instincts took over. He signaled his men, and the Rangers opened fire with suppressed weapons. The aliens were fast, their movements almost liquid. But they weren't prepared for the precision of the Rangers. Within moments, the patrol was down. Miller's voice cut through the comms. It said, 30 seconds. Fall back, Tanner ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos. The team retreated just as the EMP detonated, a surge of energy rippling through the structure. The glowing relay flickered and died, its once imposing presence reduced to a lifeless husk. "Nice work, boys," Riley said, grinning despite the sweat on his brow. Tanner didn't share the moment of levity. He was already thinking ahead, his mind on the next target. This was only the beginning, and he knew the aliens wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Still, as he looked at his men, tired but unbroken, he allowed himself a glimmer of hope. Let's show them what happens when you mess with Earth. The invasion began at dawn, heralded by a series of blinding flashes as the alien fleet descended through the atmosphere. Massive warships broke through the clouds like harbingers of doom, their sleek, metallic hulls reflecting the light of the rising sun. The sound of their engines, deep and resonant, reverberated across the landscape, shaking windows and sending flocks of birds scattering into the sky. From his vantage point atop a crumbling office building, Captain Mike Tanner watched as the alien ships began deploying troops. Spherical drones shot out like cannonballs, zipping through the air with unnatural speed, scanning the streets below. Behind them came the ground forces, tall, insectoid warriors clad in shimmering armor that seemed to ripple with every movement. Tanner noted their precision, the way they moved as one, their formation tight and disciplined. "They're setting up a perimeter," said Sergeant Jake Riley, crouched beside Tanner with a pair of binoculars. His voice was low, tinged with grudging respect. "These guys aren't amateurs." "No, they're not," Tanner replied, his tone even. "Which makes it even more important that we remind them who they're dealing with." Behind them, the rest of the Rangers were spread out across the rooftop, checking their weapons and gear. Specialist Chris Miller sat cross-legged, his portable console connected to a makeshift antenna. The screen flickered as he worked, deciphering the alien comms traffic with a furrowed brow. "They're coordinating heavily," Miller said, his voice tense. "Squad movements, patrol routes, even air support. They're not here to play around." Tanner nodded, his eyes never leaving the scene below. "Good. That makes them predictable." Riley grinned, his rifle resting against his shoulder. "What's the plan, Captain?" "Distract them with a fireworks show and hit them where it hurts." "Something like that," Tanner replied, his lips curling into a faint smile. "We're splitting into 2 teams. Riley, you're leading the diversion. Keep them busy, but don't overcommit. Miller and I will handle their comms hub. Without coordination, their advantage evaporates." Riley's grin widened. "Just give the word." Tanner's radio crackled, and he heard the faint, guttural voices of the aliens. Miller had patched into their frequency, the feed chaotic but clear enough to discern their growing confidence. They were preparing to sweep the city, expecting no significant resistance. "Let's show them how wrong they are," Tanner said, rising to his feet. "Move out." The Rangers descended the building with practiced efficiency, their boots barely making a sound against the crumbling stairwell. Outside, the streets were eerily quiet, the distant hum of alien drones the only sign of life. Riley's team broke off, heading toward the nearest patrol zone, while Tanner and Miller made their way toward the comms hub. Riley's team struck first. The aliens, confident in their superiority, were caught off guard by the sudden onslaught. Explosions erupted as Riley's squad deployed improvised explosives, sending debris and alien bodies flying. The Rangers moved like shadows, their suppressed rifles picking off targets with deadly precision before slipping back into cover. The aliens responded quickly, their drones sweeping in to track the attackers. But Riley was ready. "EMPs live," he shouted, ducking behind a burned-out vehicle as Miller's device activated. A wave of energy surged through the area, and the drones dropped from the sky like stones. "Not so tough now, are you?" Riley muttered, motioning for his men to reposition. Meanwhile, Tanner and Miller closed in on the comms hub. The structure loomed ahead, its sleek, angular design glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. Alien guards patrolled its perimeter, their movements sharp and methodical. Tanner studied their patterns, his mind already working out the best approach. 2 sentries by the main entrance, he whispered. Another 3 on the far side. We'll need to take them out quietly. Miller nodded, pulling a small drone from his pack. I can create a distraction. Give you an opening. Tanner watched as Miller deployed the drone, its tiny rotors spinning silently as it zipped toward the far side of the hub. Moments later, a small explosion drew the guards' attention, their heads snapping toward the source. Tanner seized a moment, moving swiftly and silently toward the entrance. His knife flashed once, twice, and the sentries crumpled without a sound. Inside, the hub was a maze of corridors and alien machinery, the air thick with the hum of energy. Tanner and Miller moved cautiously, their weapons at the ready. They encountered little resistance, most of the guards having been drawn outside by Riley's diversion. Still, Tanner's grip on his rifle tightened. He could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him, every step a reminder of what was at stake. They reached the central control room, a cavernous space filled with glowing panels and floating holograms. Miller immediately set to work, his fingers flying across his console as he hacked into the alien systems. Tanner stood guard, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. I'm in, Miller said after what felt like an eternity. Give me a few minutes to shut this thing down. Tanner nodded, his gaze shifting to the doorway. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly, growing louder with each passing second. He raised his rifle, his body tense. Make it quick, he said, his voice low. The first alien appeared in the doorway, its insectoid form silhouetted against the glowing corridor. Tanner fired, the sharp crack of his rifle cutting through the hum of the machinery. The alien dropped, but more followed, their weapons glowing with ominous energy. They know we're here, Tanner said, backing toward Miller. How much longer? Almost there, Miller replied, his voice strained. The console in front of him beeped, and the lights in the room flickered. Done. Their comms are offline. Tanner fired another burst, dropping the last of the aliens in the corridor. Good. Now, let's get out of here. The 2 men retraced their steps, moving quickly but carefully through the hub. Outside, the sound of distant gunfire and explosions told Tanner that Riley's team was still holding their own. He keyed his radio. Riley, the comms are down. Time to fall back. Copy that, Riley replied, his voice crackling through the static. We're on the move. As they regrouped, the Rangers found a safe house on the outskirts of the city. They were battered and bruised, but alive. Tanner looked around at his men, his expression grim but determined. This isn't over, he said, his voice steady. They'll adapt, and so will we. But tonight, we reminded them of one thing. They picked the wrong planet to invade. Riley leaned against the wall, a satisfied grin on his face. Damn right we did. The campfire crackled softly in the center of the abandoned industrial yard, its warm light flickering against the dark, crumbling walls. Captain Mike Tanner sat on an overturned crate, his rifle resting across his knees. The night air was heavy with the smell of charred metal and ozone, remnants of the earlier battle. Around him, the Rangers settled into their makeshift camp, their faces lit by the orange glow of the flames. No one spoke for a long time. The silence wasn't awkward. It was the kind of quiet that came after a hard-fought victory, a chance to reflect before the next inevitable fight. Sergeant Jake Riley broke the stillness, leaning back against a rusted beam, his hands laced behind his head. So, Captain, think they're licking their wounds up there? He tilted his chin toward the night sky, where faint, distant glimmers betrayed the alien fleet still in orbit. Tanner didn't respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the fire, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, they're not done. Not by a long shot. But they're learning. Riley chuckled, though the sound lacked humor. Yeah? Well, so are we. Specialist Chris Miller, seated cross-legged with his laptop balanced on his thighs, glanced up from his screen, the light from his monitor reflected in his glasses as he spoke. They underestimated us, that's for sure. They thought it would be easy, a clean sweep. But they didn't account for one thing. And what's that? Riley asked, his smirk returning. Miller leaned back, stretching his legs out in front of him. History. Humans are survivors. Doesn't matter how advanced the enemy is. When the chips are down, we find a way. Riley snorted, pulling a protein bar from his vest pocket. History, huh? Guess that's your way of saying we're too stubborn to quit. Tanner finally looked up, his gaze sweeping over his men. He's right, he said quietly. Every major conflict we've fought, every time someone's tried to break us, it's the same story. They look at us and see weakness. They see division, chaos. What they don't see is how that chaos sharpens us. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. The firelight danced in his eyes, and for a moment, the weariness in his face seemed to fade. The Revolutionary War. We were a ragtag group of farmers and blacksmiths going up against the most powerful army in the world. No one thought we could win, but we did, because we adapted. Miller nodded, his fingers idly tapping against the edge of his laptop. World War II. Normandy. We took a beach that was practically a death trap because we refused to accept failure as an option. Vietnam, Riley added, his tone softening. Say what you will about how it ended, but the Rangers came out of that war with a reputation for being damn near unstoppable in the jungle. Tanner smiled faintly, appreciating the contributions, but knowing he needed to drive the point home. What we do, what humans do, is fight when others would give up. We dig in. We improvise. We turn what looks like a losing hand into a victory. That's why we're still here, and why those aliens up there, he gestured toward the sky, are going to start thinking twice. The camp fell silent again, the only sound the occasional pop of the fire. Tanner leaned back, his gaze drifting upward. He thought about the aliens, how their technological superiority had made them arrogant. They'd expected a quick victory, but Earth wasn't just another target to conquer. It was a place forged in struggle, its people hardened by centuries of conflict. We'll need to keep adapting, Tanner said after a moment. They'll study us just like we're studying them. Next time, they'll be smarter, faster. We can't rely on the same tricks. Riley shrugged, tearing into his protein bar. Good thing we've got plenty more up our sleeves. Right, Miller? Miller grinned, though his eyes betrayed his exhaustion. Always. I've been working on a way to disrupt their fleet's command structure. If we can hit their orbiting relays, we might even force them to retreat. Riley laughed. See? This is why we keep the nerd around. Tanner allowed himself a brief chuckle, shaking his head. It's not just about tech or tactics. It's about mindset. Every one of you is here because you know how to think on your feet. That's something no amount of alien tech can replace. The fire crackled again, sending a shower of sparks into the air. Riley watched them rise, his expression unusually thoughtful. You think they'll ever get it? That maybe this planet isn't worth the trouble? They'll get it, Tanner said firmly. Eventually, but not before we make them pay for every inch they try to take. The Rangers nodded, their determination evident despite their fatigue. Tanner felt a surge of pride. These men were more than soldiers. They were a reflection of everything humanity had endured and overcome. They were the reason Earth still had a fighting chance. Hours later, as the camp settled into an uneasy rest, Tanner remained awake, his mind racing. He thought about the battles yet to come, about the sacrifices that would be needed. But most of all, he thought about the message they were sending, not just to the aliens but to anyone watching. Humanity wasn't defenseless. It wasn't weak. It wasn't easy to break. It was a lesson the ragmail empire was beginning to understand.